Hey there, and welcome to the Be Unmessable with podcast. I am your host, Josselyne Herman-Saccio, and I'm very excited about my guest today. We've known each other for more than a decade. And, Mel is an award-winning community activist with a 3-decade track record for shifting systems to benefit marginalized communities. And he's been featured in 4 books on social change. He was endorsed by the New York Times for producing sustainable results. Mel is also a social justice pioneer who, as the first transgender person in New York to run for public office, sparked a widespread public dialogue about gender expression and equality. He's the co-founder and chief strategist. Like I'm exhausted saying this bio. He's the co-founder and chief strategist of Game Changers, a nonprofit that provides tools for positive change at scale. And he was also the host of the podcast Pot of Gold, which was a top ranking podcast about regenerative economics. And he holds degrees, get this, okay, this is like, he would be like 90, but it doesn't make any sense. He holds degrees in math, communication, systems, engineering, and is certified in sustainable business strategy at Harvard. I got to take a breath. Welcome, Mel Wymore. Welcome to the show.
Wow, Jocelyn, you really know how to punch a bullet point. That's awesome.
I was
Thank
like,
you.
this bio is exhausting, but your life hasn't been exhausting because I know you and I know you really well. So, talk to us a little bit about your journey and how you ended up here doing what you're doing.
Okay, my journey. Well, I was raised by my father and mother. My mother was a community activist, and my father was a professor in systems engineering. So there you
So
go.
that
That's
kind of makes sense. It's like if
yeah,
Mel Gibson and Charlize Theron had a baby,
exactly,
Okay, yes,
exactly. And I'm like a little mirror image of both of them. And for me, growing up, a bit of as an outsider, or feeling a little bit outsider, because I didn't really fit into gender norms. I was always looking for, kind of helping out the underdog, and also building community that's very inclusive. So, by the time I was 15, I was making clubs of all kinds of different odd, weird activities, just to bring people together and have a great time. And as I've grown up over many decades now, I won't mention how many.
not too many, because then that means I'm many. So we got to keep it. Let's
I think
relax on the many.
I out-decade you, but maybe not. But anyway, I feel like we've been alive in a period of interesting polarization, or increasing polarization,
Yes.
division, divisiveness, and almost extreme individuality in a certain way. And I really have become someone who's almost like very focused, laser focused on how do we have society really be the best it can be? Like, you're an amazing coach. I don't think anyone would say that Josselyne Herman-Saccio is not the best coach they know. I really don't know anyone who would say that. But
You
and
have a
that's
very small circle now.
that's not, I don't know Tony Robbins personally, but but
Exactly.
anyway, I really feel like you're someone who brings out the best in people, and you're someone who can create community very effectively. And I think what I do is try to focus on bringing out the best in society. Like, how do we create collective action, collective experience that um, really brings out the best in all of us? And I feel like oftentimes it's more than just maximizing our individual contribution or individual
Yeah.
freedom, but it's becoming aware of the underlying systems that shape our behavior, the cultural conventions that kind of keep our minds narrow and non-inclusive, and kind of the mental models that force us to compete and judge each other, or outrank each other, rather than collaborate and share the wealth, share the goods. And I'm not saying it should be I'm not talking about a governistic kind of solution. I'm talking about really shifting the way we think about society and looking at the things that are often hidden from us, to make it better.
And let's talk about systems a little bit. You and I have quite a background working in this area, but most people don't even think about systems. They just kind of deal with the symptoms that are in the foreground while the systems are in the background. So, talk a little bit about what you mean by systems when it comes to humanity or community or culture.
Oh, I can give hundreds of examples, but as a community activist, let me give you a very simple one. Okay, in New York City, where I have spent much of my adult life as a community activist, we have playgrounds. And playgrounds are super important to quality of life. Everyone who has a child needs a playground. That's where we go exercise and communicate and thrive together. And when we think about accessible playgrounds, we think about playgrounds with ramps. Basically, that's what we do is we take a playground for kind of standard design and we add ramps and we call it an accessible playground. But that's a system we have in place. That's a system about how we design playgrounds and how we think about playgrounds. But shifting that system would actually be something like shifting the whole context of what is a playground and say, okay, what if not just accessible playground, what if we made a universal playground that's designed for every type of child, every type, blind, autistic, deaf, handicapped in the physical way. And when you look at that, we actually had a project on 105th Street in Amsterdam where we took this one playground, made it an universally accessible or universally inclusive playground instead of just an accessible playground. And suddenly, we had an entirely different design. And so that's the symptom. We took that problem and we changed that. But what we also did is we looked at all the design metrics that the city uses for designing playgrounds, and we shifted them from here's what an accessible playground is to here's what a universal playground is. So now when New York City builds a new playground, they have that whole new metric of how to look at the design of that. And that's shifting a system. And so that's an example. So we can go from that little example to, for example, looking at how money systems work. And that really is very definitive in terms of how we all behave, how we measure our sense of success, our sense of self, our success as a country, our success as a city. And if we shift the way we think about money and really analyze what the incentives that system is giving us, and shifting those incentives, we can actually really transform what society looks like.
And what I love about what you're saying, which is what I've always loved about systems transformation, is it isn't about fixing something that's there. So, like adding a ramp, it's adding on to an existing design. It's literally designing anew from
Yeah.
nothing, from a vision, and then designing what will work to fulfill on that system versus how do we adapt what's already here to make it more this or less this. And that's what's so brilliant about the systems transformation work that you and I have been engaged with all the work that we've done. But if you look at your work as an engineer and with the games, like what you're doing in the communities that you work with, what does it take to make change that works for everyone, not just some people, not just, this group or that group? Because as a community activist, community is made up of a lot of different groups. But how do you create a system or create something that is like everyone win-win?
Right. That's such a great question. It goes to the core, really, of the whole idea, which is we as a community, our culture is constantly raising us to come up with solutions as individuals. I know the solution, and then you have to go around and convince everyone else that your solution is correct. But a systems approach is to actually first identify the problem. And the way you identify the problem is to engage all of the stakeholders involved. So if you're talking about, for example, the homelessness issues in New York City,
Or in any city,
or
yes.
any city, you would want to bring together not just homeless people or the agencies that deal with homelessness, but the residents of those communities, the businesses around that community, the underlying housing structures. You want to bring together all of those stakeholders and say, what exactly are we dealing with here? What is our vision, as you say? And even before we think about vision, first we want to talk about values. So we are all stakeholders, and some of us have values like, I want to maximize my personal wealth. And then others are saying, I want to teach everyone to be kind. And coming together and really looking and discussing about what are those core values that we all can agree on. And then how is it that the existing situation is not consistent with those values, right? And then beginning the process of identifying ways that we can shift that system such that those values would be manifest in a new creation, as you say, in a new context. So there's a lot of shifting, even in the way we think about problem solving. When we think about systemic shifts, we're not just solving a problem, we're actually creating a process of identifying and elucidating that problem and including all of the players such that when we have a solution, it's sustainable. It's not just something like, oh, I won that playground, challenge, and my design won, but then the guy who lost the design is going to sabotage or do everything possible. But if all of us are together making that system design, then we're all going to be excited when it succeeds.
And as those of you that are listening or watching can hear Mel speak, you can hear this at the level of community or cities, but I can hear it also, and hopefully you can too, at the level of companies or families, because there are systems that are kind of in the background in your family that you might not even be aware of, but that allow for the kinds of results that happen in your family. And the same thing in companies. When I work with entrepreneurs, Mel, a lot of what's missing are systems. They're doing stuff and people are busy getting stuff done in their little silos, but there is no sort of system that creates a sustainable way to produce those results so that you can move to the next level. And when you don't have sustainability, you have a lot of burnout because you're constantly dealing with problems that have no sustainable system. I mean, I'm talking in circles now, but yes, what do you hear about that?
Well, I think also we end up with default. We naturally make systems, and we end up, if we don't think about it consciously and together collaboratively, we end up with what we call default systems. And oftentimes a default system is driven by, I want something faster, better, bigger, more efficient, and those are very easy metrics to measure. So we tend to measure along those lines. Like we often measure how much money do we have in our portfolio, not how great a life we're living, or how deep our relationships are, or how much joy we experience in a day. Those are very difficult metrics to ascertain, whereas how much money I have in my bank account is really easy, so that ends up being the default metric. And so if we're not conscious about, in the first place, what are we measuring? Why is that important to us? And how do we bring those less easy metrics into that design process? And that's a lot of conversation, that's a lot of hard thinking, it's a lot of creativity, and it often challenges us to really question the assumptions and the underlying baseline requirements of a system that we don't really often check. We don't often check what is GDP, although we're all driven by it.
And, for sure, I think the design that's required, most people go by default versus design. So they don't think about their marriage from a design perspective. And
Mhm.
like you say, what are you measuring? What are you measuring? I know for myself with my marriages, because you know my husband and you've known me for a long
Love
time.
him, love him.
Everybody loves Michael. But we've been together 30 years and we have had 5 fights. He says 4. I say 5, but I'm not going to argue about it. So whatever, but I say 5. And that is completely a direct result of a lot of the systems we've built in our relationship so that we end up with a result like that. So if you're not measuring fights in your marriage, when I say that to people, they go, I had 5 fights this morning with my spouse. I don't even know
Yeah.
what you're talking about. Like, I don't even count that. And that's kind of the point. If you're not measuring it, you're not going to be able to impact it. Just like your money, it's an easy metric because it's there on the screen, right? And you don't have to do much thinking. It's like whatever it says, it is. But at the same time, if you're not measuring the money, you don't look at the number on the screen every month or every week or every day or every year even. You maybe get your year-end statement and you go, oh, it's up from last year. Okay, I guess that's good or whatever. So people who, and same thing with well-being, if you're not measuring your blood pressure or your weight or whatever. So one of the basic principles that I function from and coach people from, and I think you'd be aligned with, is you move what you measure. And if
Yeah,
you're not measuring it, it's only going to move by accident.
right.
So, what do you want to move? You better start measuring it.
Right. And that just takes a little extra work. I mean, it's not as easy to measure hugs in a
Happiness,
day
or
or
yes,
happiness,
exactly.
but you can, and it takes a little more effort and going a little bit deeper. But those conversations and discussions of identifying those ways of measuring life is so worth it. It's just so worth it. Your life transforms over the hill because of that kind of thinking rather than just like default what is society telling me I should measure. And that's
Exactly.
we do that over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So
And
a lot
it's,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
I mean, a lot of the work of sustainable design or sustainable change is really questioning the powers that be or the default assumptions and having conversations that say, okay, what is this creating versus what can we create as a different direction?
Yeah. And that requires looking, not knowing,
Yes,
and most
exactly.
people like to know versus look because it's like there's nothing there. You got to kind of invent it, like designing the universal playground was a creation, not necessarily a reaction to wheelchairs can't get in the playground.
Right. Right. It's a very narrow scope, but we are very narrow in a lot of ways. We're creatures of habit. We like to belong in a very kind of a default way. We like to belong, right? And so rather than creating the community in which we want to belong or to which we want to belong, instead we just contort ourselves in order to belong to the one that exists. And that's happening in all across, like you say, in families, in gender conversations, in race conversations, in professional conversations, and then in all of society. So we really need to exercise the muscle of questioning what is it we want and how do we want to get there together.
And since you brought up gender, I do want to talk about gender a little bit, given you were the first transgender politician in New York City, to run for office. And, as you know, my youngest child is transgender, and this is a subject near and dear to my heart. What is it that you found, given this is called Be Unmessable with, and I'll let you talk about anything in your life you want to talk about in terms of when you dealt with challenging circumstances and emerged unmessable with, but specific to that area, given your history and children and all of that, what did you have to deal with that you transcended what could have taken you down for the count? Because I
Mm,
know it's so common for, especially as young children, to, be transgender but not yet transitioned, and the depression and the anxiety and the substance abuse and all the things that people use to cope with not being who they are.
right.
What was that like for you, and how was that journey for you in terms of being unmessable with, which you clearly are?
How many podcast episodes do we have between us?
Well, you can come back. We'll do a series on this. Yeah.
No, it is, there's probably no more entrenched system than the system of gender identity in our world culture. It's ubiquitous that we've identified our reality across the binary system of gender, and that is shifting, but not entirely. And having felt an outsider for a long time, but also someone who was very adept at contorting myself in order to fit in, I really didn't get that gender was at the core of my discomfort until my mid 40s. Okay, so
Mm.
I was already a parent of two pubescent children. Okay. And when I discovered that, I had been their mom, I had been very active in the PTA, very active in the community as a mother, as someone who really held strongly to the identity and my role as the mom of my two children. And so, as a parent leader, I had to choose how to come out and how to bring my transition to the community at large. And it would have been very easy. A lot of people, they go away to transition and come back a different person. And instead, for the cause of being unmessable with, I decided that gender was a conversation that was not well honed in society. It was a very foreign conversation in 2008 when I began my transition. At that point, there was not even Caitlyn Jenner, or the only one was Renee Richards. That was the only real person that anyone knew from the 70s. And so I decided it was an opportunity for societal education and shift. And so I took on the idea of, rather than being kind of either running away or being doctrinaire about my gender shift, I was going to be an educator. And so my children and I decided on a language that I was going to shift my male pronoun, my female pronoun to a male pronoun, but I was going to retain the role and name label mom. And so this really blew people's minds, right? Like they kept on
Oh,
saying,
but I love it because it's all a creation.
it
That,
was
you're
all
speaking my
creation.
language. And I think I knew you right when that was happening. I think that's
Exactly.
when we met that year.
Yes, that was the year. And so I really, it was very challenging in the face of no agreement. Like, okay, you're going to be he, but now you have to be father. I'm like, no, they have a father. I'm their mother. Yes, I'm he. And, so we went through a long process of changing the listening of our world to have me be their mom and be addressed as he. And, having three people in a household go through puberty together was quite an interesting process. But yeah, we did it. And yeah, it was a very fulfilling process, but it did take what you say, being unmessable with in the face of no agreement whatsoever.
And how did the people at work and, not just the PTA, how was that received? And was there any backlash that, just sort of fell to the side because they couldn't get on board with the new program, so to speak?
Well, I found there was a huge correlation between my openness and willingness to be authentic and accept questions and be very open to like very kind of raw questions coming at me, um, and being generous about that made a big difference. But
Yeah.
still, there were times when there were costs involved. Like some people really couldn't get with the program, or open enough to kind of see different possibilities. And I did have to be willing to let go of that. Like just, be authentic, be generous, and acknowledge that some people are going to be where they are, and I'm not going to make a difference. And by and large, I would say 90% of the people were just like, yeah, cool, we're figuring it out. Sorry, I called you
Yeah.
she again. I still get called she by people in my life. It's not a problem for me at all. But yeah, some people just didn't, and I really wish them all well.
Yes,
You know,
exactly. It's not I know my parents who are in their 90s, every once in a while will call my daughter he and, but
mm,
still by her new name, but then it's confusing. I get it. It's like I can't think of her any other way now. Like I
yeah.
can't say he. It's weird to me to think of her.
Well, she's been
She,
she
yes.
since she was born, right? Like so there's no, uh, I don't. It's really interesting once you get a handle on this gender thing. It's very difficult. Like you see people for who they are, really. I mean, if they say who they are and you see that, that's easy. But it's still, our brains get wired and we make mistakes. So
Yeah.
it's not.
And that is part of the whole world of being unmessable with. It's not about being tough or not feeling your feelings or not being vulnerable. It's about being able to have a vision and keep acting on fulfilling the vision rather than get stuck in reacting or surviving some
Mm,
situation or existing construct, which is,
right.
our whole entire world. So is there any other situation in your life where you were dealing with something super challenging and you found yourself having to like rise from the ashes, so to speak, or not go down for the count, which could have been justifiable and explainable, but you ended up rising to the occasion, so to speak?
Hundreds of those examples. I mean, I think the process of being a community activist is a lot about that. You're someone who's defending a very small, usually underfunded group of people against some very powerful well endowed people who have their ideas about a particular community. And so, in the case of being, for example, let's take bike lanes on the Upper West Side. There are people that wanted to ride bikes and be more environmentally conscious and add that exercise, that design to our streets in New York. And so many people were ardently
Oh,
against
like
that.
crazy. I was the president of my community at that time, and I had so many people coming to me, this can't happen. This is going to ruin our neighborhood. I was like, oh my God, like who
Yeah.
knew that this would be such a reactivating situation? It's bicycles, you know?
It's my parking. It's my, and it was really fascinating. That happens a lot where people have a habit or they have a claim to a public space and they think it's theirs, and then there's this long, arduous conversation, and you really have to be someone who stands in the value of inclusivity and in the value of system shift, and be someone who really says, wait a minute, this is a public street. It's for all of us. And we can shift the design of that, the context of that, from just for cars to for everybody, bikes and pedestrians and cars and delivery trucks and everything. And that's a shift. That's a system shift that happened in New York City, like really transformed the whole city in a matter of 10 years, I would say. But that's a repetitive experience as a community activist, in new developments that come in, where developers with billions of dollars want to come in and just take over huge neighborhoods and replace them with luxury towers. And in one case, I think the biggest project I ever presided over was a 3 million square foot mixed use complex, which is, just going to be all luxury housing. And through a community engagement process where we included all the stakeholders and we developed the core principles and came up with our own vision, we ended up getting a brand new school that was, fully integrated with all the different layers, social economic layers within the community. We got affordable housing at 20% of that, and 30% of affordable housing, which became a city criteria for all new
Standard, yeah.
developments, city standard. And we ended up with a new park, $20 million new park, and a whole new leg to Riverside Park out of that development. But that was also just this process of what's possible, how do we engage with each other, but also with these billionaires that were coming in, and really seeing a vision that would really benefit everybody over the long term. And it really worked out. It is a big development, no question, but it has all these public amenities that people are enjoying to this day. So,
And what I love about that is it wasn't going to be that way anyway. So it took really digging in, not just kind of going along for the ride, but digging in and having the kind of conversations which, you may need to have with your community, or you may need to have with your family, or you may need to have with your company, the people in your company, your board of directors, your staff, whatever, who are the stakeholders in whatever you're dealing with that you can engage with and collaborate with and listen for their commitment behind their complaints so
yes.
that you can create a design that works for everybody, a win-win-win situation. Obviously I love what you do and I always have, but that's a great example of this in action,
Yeah.
not theoretical. Yeah,
No, you're
beautiful.
right.
And is there, yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think this notion of things don't go the way you want them to unless you actually put it in, right? And a lot of times that's just really getting clear about what are your values, what are everyone else's values, and what do you build out of those values. And we're seeing a world now where that's less a part of the conversation, and more part of the conversation is more, better, faster. And when it's more, better, faster, we tend to overlook the stuff that really matters in life.
Yeah, and that is, I think that's a good kind of takeaway from this is, in any area where you have a vision, slow down for a minute. Slow down and really look at what you're creating. What are you designing? Not just get stuff done and sort of deal with what life is throwing at you, but just slow down, look from nothing, look up and say, okay, what's my vision? How do I want this to look? And then what do I need to design so that it ends up looking this way, which is
And
like an engineer architect conversation.
exactly. And who do we want in that creation? So often we don't include all the people that need to be included.
Yeah, yeah. And is there anything that you're working on in life? I like to make myself available as a coach. Obviously, that's what I do on the podcast. If there's any request for coaching that you have, and if not, that's fine too. But if there's anything that you're committed to that you haven't yet made happen or that's moving slower than you want it to, I'd be happy to just give you some turbo coaching if you want.
Love it. I will always accept coaching from you, Jocelyn. Especially on a podcast, especially without the price tag. That's
There
awesome.
you go. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, so I'm a co-founder of a nonprofit, Game Changers, and our real mission is to teach system shifts, but we do that through games, so that children can stop learning just that you solve a problem by coming up with the answer, but you solve a problem by all the things we just talked about. And we have a particular focus on shifting our relationship to the resources on the planet, our relationship to how money works on the planet, so that we can really transform our economic system to go from one that's extractive to one that's regenerative and really sustain human life on the planet. So I and my colleagues have developed a game called World Pieces. It's kind of it's like Monopoly, except with the commons involved. It's about in Monopoly, our job is to beat each other and win. In World Pieces, you collaborate and you compete in order to restore world resources, and it's an awesome, fun game. Kids are starting to really enjoy playing it, but we're rolling it out, just starting to roll it out, and we were really good at developing it, but now we're in the place where how do we get it out there to the world, and how do we really make it sing?
And what's your vision for it? Like if you're going to look a year from now, what would you want the distribution or the access to it to be?
My vision is for world pieces to be played in every middle school in the world. Okay, every middle school kid knows what world pieces is, and they've played that game. And because they played that game, they want to bring it home and play it with their friends at home too. And so it becomes, not just a learning tool, but a fun game to play. That really starts to shift the way we think as we grow up about what trade and economics and resources mean.
And that's within a year, every middle school
No,
in the
no, that's
world?
the no,
Okay.
no. It's
That's
like
your vision.
the big vision. In a year, I would say I would like the World Pieces game to be. Um, let's take a region like New York City. I would like to
Hmm.
have a 10% penetration in middle schools in New York City and a couple of universities in their business curriculum.
Okay, good. So then if you and you probably have these numbers, if not, you can get them pretty quickly because you worked in New York City politics, is to find out how many schools is that. So if there's, 500 middle schools, roughly whatever, then so you want 10%, so it's 50 middle schools. So then it's a question of, okay, who are you going to be your key partners? So if you look a year from now, you want to have it in 50 middle schools and three universities. I'm just making up these numbers. You come up with whatever the numbers you are. Then you'd have to look, okay, so from, 3 months earlier, then what would it be in? Okay, it'd be in 40. I'm making up numbers again, but you'd have to come up with the metrics, like what you're going to move. So if it's 40 and 2, and then it's, 3 months earlier, it's 25 and one, or however you want to do it, and then start creating an action plan. But here's what I think well, what do you think is going to mess with you in fulfilling the plan? Because you know how to come up with a plan. You're an engineer. So
Yeah.
what's the thing that's going to mess with you in fulfilling on it? Because to me, 50 and 3 seems very doable.
Yeah, I think for me, what stops me is actually picking up the phone. Like, that's the actual human conversation.
Interaction. Yes.
I'm very good at thinking up things in my head.
Yes, exactly. But then when it's like, wouldn't life be so much easier if there were no people? It would just be so much easier. These people are just everywhere. Yes. Meanwhile, those people are also the access to you fulfilling on your vision. So it's going to be about your word, Mel. That's the main thing. Okay. So once you create the plan and you have, the 5 phone calls a day that you're going to have, Because if you don't have the conversations, nothing's going to happen unless you get somebody else to have the conversations, which is possible too. You don't have to do it all to have this. But I think you should have the conversations because you're amazing in speaking to people and enrolling them in the possibility of what this is. So for you not to have the conversations, sort of a ripoff for them. That's how I view it. So if
Mm-hmm.
you had a game, and I think of everything as a game. So if you had a game of 3 to 5 conversations a day, whether it's with the PTA presidents, or it's with the high school principals, or it's with the DOE officials, or it's with the real estate owners of the land, whatever it is, that you have a list. One action would be to make a list of all the different stakeholders in this, and then come up with an action plan that every day, no matter what, you're going to have 3 to 5 conversations, and then keep your word. Now, if you already know what's going to mess with you is getting on the phone, it's even more important for you to have your word be more important than getting on the phone, because you'll always come up with a reason for the thing you gave your word to. Well, it's not that important that I do it today, or, oh, I did 6 yesterday. Oh, so I don't have to, maybe I'm not the right person, and da, 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 whatever, because that's about what you gave your word to, getting on the phone. If
Mm-hmm.
you can create the relationship to your word, that it's like every time you don't do what you said, you're a smaller person.
Oof, that's hard.
Well, it's a shift in your
Right.
thinking, right? So it's a contextual shift. Most people, why they have trouble keeping their word, and most people are okay, high performance people like you and like the people that I work mostly are pretty good at keeping their word to other people.
Yes.
But when it comes to keeping your word to yourself, not so much.
You hit the nail on the head, actually. I've been working hard on this idea of keeping my word to myself, because that is as a public servant slash activist, you're always looking at the out there and how to contribute, and that is a matter of keeping your word to others, and then keeping your word to yourself sometimes is what falls in the cracks, and that's a very important aspect because you really can't be powerful if you're not keeping your word to yourself. I mean,
Well, you
you have
can,
limits.
and you've produced lots of results by keeping your word to other people. But the point is, then you need those training wheels. You need to have somebody you've given your word to kind of get you up for this thing. And you don't need to do that if you develop the muscle of this shift in your relationship to, it's not what you give your word to, it's that you gave your word. So if
Right.
you say, I'll take out the garbage at 7, and you say it to yourself, you don't say it to anybody else. You relate to it's like, oh, I said I'd take out the garbage at 7. Forget about what you gave your word to, because you're going to find a good reason not to, or a good reason to push it 10 minutes or whatever, a justification if you don't do it. If you just look at it as like the word is the power, not the thing you give your word to,
I like that.
then
That's really good. Yeah.
that'll shift your whole relationship to it, because then it's like it's almost like a video game, right? So you have like this analogy is going to fall apart already, I can tell, but like, let's say you have this big thing, it's like a big piece of gold, okay? And then every time you say X, and you do X, you get an extra piece of gold. But every time you say X and don't do X, you lose a piece of gold. So
That's
that
a great
piece
game. Yeah. I love it. I love that game.
is just going to start to disintegrate. And what is that piece is you. So
Right.
your relationship to your own power disintegrates every time you say, I'll do 100 sit-ups and you do 90. Nobody else knows, but
Right.
you have to live with yourself.
Yeah. That's so true. And the word being the primary focus rather than the outcome is really important because I noticed even early on as a parent, everyone was doing these timeouts that were 2 hours long. And I could, as a single parent, there's no way I could do a 2 hour timeout. I would drive myself crazy. And so I started
Yes,
doing
exactly.
2 minute timeouts. It had the same impact, the same work, and it was sustainable for me because I could keep the word around that, right? And so it makes sense. You got to pick the promise that you can sustain and fulfill on, and then you
Yeah.
can grow that over time.
And even if you have a big promise, even if it's the 2 hour promise and you don't see how to do it, it doesn't matter, because it's not about what you promise. It's that you promised. So
Yeah.
if you have a promise, then you're going to move heaven and earth to have that thing happen, not because the thing is important,
Hmm.
but because your word is important to you.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
And that's, abracadabra. With my word, I speak, I create. If creating is important to you, then your word becomes important to you. And then it stops being about the thing, because you can always find a reason or justification or excuse for the thing.
Right.
Yeah. So
That's
you'll have
very.
to let me know how that
I will let you know.
supports you.
A year from now, you'll see. In New York City, we'll
Yes,
have world pieces.
that's right. I love it. I mean, if when I have grandchildren, they'll play it, because now my kids are too old to play. Although maybe not.
No,
Maybe
they're
we should be
not. They're
playing
not.
it.
It's a game that we can all play. It's fun. You'll see. It's fun. We'll play it together soon.
I love it. I love that. And I'm so happy that you joined us and your generosity not only of time but of your, willingness to be coached. That takes a certain kind of courage, especially on a podcast, right? It's not like a
Always
private
been.
call. But I am committed that the coaching makes a difference for the people listening. So for those of you that got value out of this episode, anything in this episode, you resonated with something, please rate and review the episode for sure. And then, Mel, is there anything specific you want us to, give people in terms of how to contact you? You want me to just put your website in the show notes, or is there something specific that you want to invite people to do, or anything?
We're gamechangers.world, and it's a website. It's undergoing some updates, so it'll be fine and soon. And yeah, I just want to encourage everyone to keep looking, keep thinking bigger, and see yourself as part of something bigger in our society, something that we all share as as a great oneness that we can make shine. And I think it's such an important message that we start thinking of ourselves as one being with individual hearts and minds.
Expressions. Yes,
Expressions.
yes. Beautiful. Well, I love you so much. Thank you so much for being
Love you
here.
too.
And we will see you guys on the next episode of the Be Unmessable with podcast. Thank you so much for joining us in this episode of Be Unmessable with the podcast. And I am so happy that you spent some time with us. And I want to make sure that every time you spend time with us, you get value. So I want to offer you a free workshop on resilience and unmessable withness. So if you click below, Dr. Kathy Connor and I put together this workshop, and it's free, and it'll give you a world around the difference between resilience and being unmessable with, not only from my perspective, but from a neuroscientist's perspective. So, those of you that love that world of neuroscience, click below and get the workshop for free. See you on the next episode.